Welcome, .NET friends. It's time for another episode of the On .NET Live Show. If you're tuning in for the first time, our mission here on this show is to empower all of you, our .NET community members, to achieve more. I'm your host, Scott Addie, and I'm joined by co-hosts Maira Wenzel and Arthur Vickers. If you've been around .NET or Entity Framework for a while, these are faces you recognize. We welcome them to the show. There's also another face here you probably recognize. Today's guest, ErikEj. Erik, could you briefly introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, my name is Erik Ejlskov Jensen, and I come from Denmark, so I'm broadcasting live here from north of Copenhagen. And I'm a .NET consultant and Azure architect, and I've also been a Microsoft MVP for a number of years and contributed to Entity Framework and Entity Framework Core with various libraries and tooling. And I'm the maintainer of a popular Visual Studio extension and now also a .NET tool called EF Core Power Tools, used for easy reverse engineering of an existing database with lots of options for fine-tuning it to your liking. And I also contribute to other Microsoft projects like SQL Client, which is the driver that sits between Entity Framework and Entity Framework Core and Entity Framework Old, for that matter, and the database network layer.
So there you have it, folks. That's a lot of stuff.
He mentioned he's a contributor, right? Like he's not just like a mere contributor, right? Like it's like
yeah.
So I guess where we would start with today's show is what I'm hearing is based on the topic for today. What's old is new again. We're talking about EF Classic, going back to the EF6 days. Specifically, yes. I think you wanted to talk about the SQL Server provider and things that are happening there. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's a new provider out. We'll get to what it's called and where you get it and why you want it. But basically, the problem that a lot of people have been facing was they had a .NET Framework application, or they had a .NET application using Entity Framework Classic or Entity Framework 6, as it's called. But they were stuck in the ability to use new features in SQL Server. They were stuck in the ability to use new authentication methods against the Azure SQL database, like MFA authentication and default authentication, Azure Identity default authentication, and in particular, a very interesting authentication method, in my opinion, is called the Managed Identity authentication method, which allows you to avoid using passwords between Azure services. So you can use managed identity. You can provide an identity to a service, and then you can allow that identity, for example, an app service, to connect to your database, and that saves you from storing any passwords anywhere, which is quite nice.
So I think if you think about all the things that Erik is talking about there, all of these things are related to authorization to security, essentially. And that's really the reason why we've made this release. Because people with older code still need to be up to date on modern security practices. And Erik, do you think it would be useful if I gave a brief history of the SQL client?
Yeah.
So SQL client, so as Erik mentioned, there's two levels if you're using something like Entity Framework. So there's the ORM level, the Entity Framework stuff, and then there's a lower level driver, and we call those things ADO.NET providers, and they've been around for a long time, since the beginning of .NET Framework, basically. And the current API is basically .NET 2.0, not .NET Core 2.0, but .NET Framework 2.0. That's when all that stuff was invented. And back then, SQL Server, the SQL Server provider, even though SQL Server is just a database, it was Microsoft database. So it was included in .NET Framework. So every Windows box that has .NET Framework installed has a SQL Server database provider installed. And we call that SQL Client. And specifically, we call it System Data SQL Client, because the namespace is system, like all .NET Framework namespaces, and so it's a System Data SQL Client. The problem with that is the compat level required to be in .NET Framework is very high. You cannot evolve very easily in .NET Framework. So several years ago, along with the SQL Client team, we worked with them to pull it out of the framework and ship a newer version that they could maintain and update quicker, that would work on both .NET Framework and .NET Core. And that is known as Microsoft Data SQL Client. And so that's where all of the work in SQL Client now goes on, in Microsoft Data SQL Client, which basically ships as a NuGet package. Regardless of where you get it from, or what platform you're on, it always comes in as a NuGet package. And so that's all of this authentication work that the SQL Client team have been doing have all gone into that new one. And nothing's really gone into System Data SQL Client. But EF6
only very high priority security fixes will ever go into System Data SQL Client.
Exactly. But the old EF6 stack, so we're not talking about EF Core here, we're talking about the old Entity Framework, that was built around System Data SQL Client. So that's what it uses out of the box by default. It uses
hard-coded to
it's basically hard-coded in there, right? Now, it's not that EF6 can work with other databases, with other database providers. It's not actually hard-coded to use System Data SQL Client, except in the initialization and expectation kind of part of it, right? And so what we really wanted to do is allow you to continue using EF6, which runs on .NET Framework and modern .NET platforms, and is a perfectly valid data access technology. You know, it's not being evolved, it's end of line and everything, but it's valid, and there's lots of code using it. Continue to use that, but now use it with a new SQL client, the new SQL client package, Microsoft Data SQL Client, so that you can use all of these cool authentication and actually not just cool, but really important for making sure your apps are secure mechanisms of authenticating things, so you've not got secrets and stuff flying around. So that's basically where we are, and why we said we need to do this. And then Erik said, Erik did all the work for this, and people have been using his package for ages. So I'll go back to Erik now, pass it back over to you.
Yeah, and I think that answered the question from viral clips as well, in terms of, is this a new feature or an add-on to an existing feature? So it's like, I think there were two parts of it, right? You added the authentication, and you also broke down into like a separate package so people can consume it directly.
Yes,
it's not a new. It's definitely not a new feature, but it's a scenario opener and a stepping stone. Also, you didn't mention that you said a lot about security authentication. In my mind, I also think of it as so if you are on .NET Framework on-prem and you're using Entity Framework 6 with .NET Framework, and you really feel that you want to move, maybe you just want to move your .NET Framework to the cloud initially and use cloud resources. Even then, you are essentially prevented from doing that unless you use SQL authentication and less good practices, and you don't get all the performance improvements and everything else that has been added in the new Microsoft Data SQL client. So it's possible, but if you want to do that in a in a well-governed way, it's basically impossible. And this is one of the scenarios that this package opens, that you can basically lift and shift a .NET Framework app into an app service and run it against Azure SQL database with the latest security fixes and the latest authentication mechanisms that are available in Entra IDE. So I think of it both as yes, as something that needed to be done to ensure secure and the modern authentication methods, but certainly also a stepping stone for a gradual migration. So the next step you can take once you've done that is saying, yeah, we actually want to move to .NET because we want to take advantage of everything that's in the .NET, like modern .NET 8 universe. We want to use Aspire, whatever, some API clients, some APIs that are easily available in .NET but not available in the .NET Framework, etc., and get a lot of the performance benefits from upgrading to .NET. Then that is very easy to do that. You can still continue to use Entity Framework 6. You will not get any optimizations from switching to EF Core at that point in time, but it's another gradual stepping stone. Then you say, okay, we get a lot of users, the things are too slow, and it's Entity Framework 6's fault. It's not a blaming game, but yeah. But if we did something else, and
we created EF Core,
exactly.
Right?
So if we did something else than stick to Entity Framework 6 Classic, we could do something, and then you can replace that component, that layer of your application, and so you don't have to do like the big bang thing where you have to switch to .NET, which you probably don't have a lot of experience with, and then switch to EF Core, which you maybe not have a lot of experience with at the same time. So this is what this is the scenario that I imagine that this package can also enable, so to speak. So, but let's have a closer look.
Erik, before we dive into this, we actually have a good question here from one of our viewers. So it's asking about what's the motivation behind this this new feature? Is it so that companies that built their systems on top of .NET Framework can continue to maintain their code? Maybe they're not quite ready to make the jump to .NET Core.
I'd maintain the code. I think it's more like take advantage of new tech with the existing .NET Framework. So this package opens up, as we mentioned already, taking advantage of Azure SQL and Entra IDE authentication methods. It also enables you to use always encrypted, both on premises and with Azure SQL database. And it also enables you to use an enhanced authentication method that's available in Azure SQL database and SQL Server 2022. All those things you simply cannot do with System Data SQL client. It's just not part of that stack. So if you want to upgrade any of your infrastructure or move to Azure SQL database, this will help. This package will help you.
Go ahead.
I think there's an understanding in the .NET teams and the people working on .NET that you want to be able to gradually migrate to newer things, to things that have the best practices in, like Erik has mentioned. But one of the things that's challenging about that is if you want to use Microsoft Data SQL Client, for example, which has all this new good stuff in, you also have to use EF Core because EF6 doesn't support it. Then that makes that a much bigger challenge to move your code onto something new. So whenever we can make this incremental, right? And so, and there's two points we've done here. If you're on .NET Framework, you can move to Microsoft Data SQL Client without moving off .NET Framework, and you can also move. You can also move to EF6 if you move from .NET Framework to .NET, you can keep using EF6 because EF6 runs on .NET Framework and .NET 6. And so there's a variety of combinations here that allow you to pick the thing that matters to you most. Do I need EF6? Well, then I'm going to have to, do I need EF Core? Then I'm going to have to do the full thing. But if I don't need EF Core right now, then I can make an incremental step, just change this one thing, maybe not even move off .NET Framework right away, maybe do this change, then move off .NET Framework, then move it in, and it makes the steps make things easier. So that's what we're trying to do, not one particular scenario really, but just making the transition easier across the board.
Yeah, and I think like what I was gonna say complements that is that like of course we would love everyone to be on the latest and greatest, but we know that's not the reality for many companies. A lot of people are still working on legacy code, right? And so bringing those features into making more secure and be able to modernize without having to go full on into .NET 8 plus EF Core, like it makes it easier to make that transition.
Exactly, Maira. And the problem was that before this package existed, there was really no choice. It was it was Big Bang, whether you liked it or not.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't like it.
It's not sometimes it's not even an option, right? Like I don't know. I worked in banks before, like it was hard to...
Don't think about it, no.
All right, do you want to share your screen now, Erik?
Yeah, let me do that. Yeah, I'm can you all see my screen now? Yeah.
Looks great.
Yeah, I'm looking at Arthur, you already went through this, so we're looking at the EF6 repository, which is open source on GitHub. So the Entity Framework 6, as I call it, classic repository. So here it's definitely highlight that there's no new development happening, but despite you explained why this happened, Arthur. That we'll just leave it with that.
Yep.
So there should be a link shared maybe after the show or something like that to a blog post that I wrote, and here I'm listing some of the things that we have mentioned already with some of the limitations of using a system data SQL client in my blog post here. And I have shared a link to this blog post. I created. There was a lot of discussion I followed the EF6 repository for many years, and there was a lot of discussion about what can we do and how should we do it, and so on. And finally, I pulled myself together and found out it actually wasn't that hard to do. Well, so I published a package called ErikEj Entity Framework SQL Server, and that package was published
2 years ago now, like
many years ago.
3 years ago.
Wow. 3 years ago, yeah. So and that package then was okay. We talked about this. We have the Microsoft Data SQL Client repository here, which is this new provider. It supports both .NET Framework and .NET Core. Actually, that's wrong, but yeah, no. So I published this package, and which has a lot of downloads, 800,000. Well, everything is, of course, relative, but yeah, a significant amount
for a package.
It is okay for a package, but it's not 1 billion downloads like some other packages. But
yeah.
Never mind.
I think it's a pretty good number for someone.
It is a
personal package.
Okay, like yeah. So like a little bit of an exotic thing here, so this was actually published, like we said, about 3 years ago, and a lot of people has adopted it and interacted with me in the repository that I maintained to develop and evolve this. So it has been, how can we say, battle hardened, I guess you can say. over those years, and we have been in very many interesting corners of the .NET universe. You can do things in many different ways, in many different scenarios, and all those scenarios have gradually been covered by this package and documented here. So then Arthur and the Entity Framework team said that they didn't rule out the possibility of actually having a package. So I offered to do a pull request based on my work here against the official EF6 repository, which then resulted in this package, which is what we're talking about today. So Microsoft Entity Framework SQL Server.
So we talked about the name of this a lot. There is no good name. So yes, this is not a great name, but we just couldn't come up with anything better. And did a lot of hammering our heads on it.
Yeah.
Naming is hard.
It does make sense to some extent. I think it's a Microsoft prefix, just like the fact that it's based on Microsoft Data SQL Client.
Yep.
And it's Entity Framework. It's not Entity Framework Core, because it's not Entity Framework Core. And it was the best name we could come up with at the time. And so it was out not so long ago, a month ago, I think, approximately. So it's rather newly baked.
But it has a lot of the existing, like from your previous package. So it's not like just
so
packaged as an official.
If you look carefully, I've actually deprecated this package and suggest the new one as an alternative. So I think a lot of people are still in the process of moving away from this one because now they get warnings from.
But it's basically. It's essentially exactly the same code as has been in Erik's package. So all the battle hardened thing that Erik mentioned applies to this, which is good. It's great that actually, I mean, we would have liked to have got the official package out sooner. I won't lie, but it's great that it's got so much use. There's a
makes you sleep better at night.
Yeah, it does definitely.
Yeah.
So there's quite a few steps, quite a few things to take into consideration when you switch to this. And part of the reason for that is that we absolutely did not want to break any existing usage of EF6. So when you get EF6 out of the box, it just thinks anything SQL Server is going to use System Data SQL Client. And we didn't change that because we didn't want to, have people update to EF 6.5 and suddenly their world breaks. We wanted you to explicitly opt in to doing this Microsoft Data SQL Client. And like I said before, EF6 is not architectured in the best way for doing that, and so that's why you have to kind of jump through a few hoops. That being said, I think it's clear the number of people who have used Erik's package and been successful with it, that even though it can be a little confusing, people get there pretty quickly. It's not as scary as it might seem.
No, but it can be a little bit daunting, and that's why we have this this long README, and it's actually been elevated to a page in the official Microsoft Docs site. So this is essentially a copy paste of the package documentation. So if you're using EDMX, it's even harder, and you have to change some namespaces. But as you said, Arthur, it's my impression that people are living with that.
So this is basically your migration guide, if you're interested.
This is exactly that migration guide. So
I mean, are you planning to go through this, like how you actually?
Yes, I'm planning to demo an upgrade. Okay. So
that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Erik, we have a question about the NuGet package you displayed, and the question is why target .NET Standard 2.1 and not 2.0?
Um,
Do you want me to answer that?
that's because that's what the Entity Framework 6 does.
Yeah, so at the time that we created the EF6 package that targeted .NET Standard, that was around the time of .NET Standard 2.1, but before everybody stopped using .NET Standard 2.1. And so it's just kind of stuck in that like netherworld of, but it's fine because I know people don't like it when we say this, but you can multi-target and get whatever you need wherever it needs to go. So don't worry about the fact that it's 2.1 because it supports .NET Framework explicitly as well. So yeah, you can't just target .NET Standard 2.0. Maybe that would have been a better option, but that was 7 years ago now or whatever. So
Yeah,
too
I think
late
there
to
was
go
also
back to
some.
that. And if
that-
you
I think-
multi-target, you can get full support across modern .NET and .NET Framework.
I think the reason why .NET Standard 2.0 was not chosen that was that you actually had to change some product code in order to downgrade it to work with 2.0.
Oh yeah, maybe.
And so it could have been .NET 3 instead, but yeah.
Yeah.
But good question. So, any more questions before we proceed? So I will just do a quick demo of an app and then upgrade it to use. Yeah, we'll get into it. But unless there's any more questions, we'll jump into the demo.
We have one more question that I'll toss up, and then I'll let you get to the demo.
No, don't worry.
The question is, will this support SQL servers that run in Docker containers, specifically on Apple Silicon chips?
Yes. As long as that SQL server running on a Docker container is 2012
some newer
and later, yes. It will support all SQL servers running everywhere.
If you can get SQL Server to run in that configuration, then this will support it.
Yeah.
But that's
if you can reach it over the network, then this will support it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go see the demo now.
Cool. So I have created this app, and it's actually based on a getting started guide for EF6, which is a blogging database. I have run a couple of scripts to create the database and added 2 tables to my local database. I'm now running on an on-premises situation here, and I have a blogging database here on my local SQL Server database. It has 2 tables, a blogs table and a post table. Let's forget about the post. So it has a couple of tables. And this article, I didn't share a link to it, it's not important, but I've actually taken everything in that article verbatim and just done it. So I have created an an Entity Framework 6 DB context, which is what we're looking at the screen. If you are familiar with Entity Framework, everything here should be completely familiar to you. We have a DB set and we have an on-model grading with a DB model builder. For some reason, everything had to be DB.
I read about that so long you wouldn't.
Yeah. And then we have this nice thing here that we can refer to a named connection string, and we have a classic app config file here, and we have a beautiful packages config file here. So you can see this is our only dependency is actually 6.2. I don't know, that's what the Visual Studio wizard gave me, but never mind. And then we have a little app here, and also this is just complete copy paste from this demo from the Entity Framework 6 documentation. So we can see it exercise some adding a block to the block table and then list all the blocks using a interesting link syntax. Yes, but never mind. And if we look a little bit deeper in the app config file, we can see we're using system data SQL client is kind of bubbling up a little bit here, and also down here.
So one of the things that's obviously apparent here is that we're EF and ADO.NET, the lower level driver, make heavy use of app config or web config, basically the old .NET configuration. And so that's, if you're not familiar with, that's what we're looking at here. And this really doesn't exist in the same form. I mean, you can use a version of it on .NET Core, which on modern .NET, which allows this to work. But this form of configuration is not natural for a modern .NET app, but it's the way EF6 is written.
No. But interestingly enough, and kudos to the Entity Framework 6 team, you can actually do code-based configuration like you would do in modern frameworks like EF Core. And actually, under the hood, this new provider takes advantage of the fact that you can do code-based configuration. So let's just try to run this app, and we'll just have a quick look in the blocks table here. You can see there's some nice links here to some really classic stuff like the Visual Studio block and the .NET Framework block.
Oh my gosh, an MSDN link.
It's bringing back memories. Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So let's try to run this. This is a console app. We're not confusing it with like too many UI, WinForms, ASP.NET web forms. Let's not get into that that area. This is just about the data access layer of your app. So we'll call this new block, we'll call it old. And it will list all the blocks in our database, and it now will include the old block. And we can just triple check by checking the data again, and we have the old block here in our local database. So now I'm going to upgrade this app to use the new provider, which will enable us to take advantage of what we talked about before, Microsoft Data SQL Client and all the interesting authentication methods. But first, I will just simply switch to that package and enable the app to use that package, but still against my on-premises database server. So I will go to manage NuGet packages and not include pre-release. I will locate this new package that we just looked at on nuget.org. And I will install it. I will accept it. Yes, absolutely. So now we should see that we have, let's just go to manage NuGet packages again. And we actually, we still have this one installed. Maybe we don't really need it. It's not important because the other one depends on it. Let's leave it like that for now. So I've installed the package. If I press F5, I haven't changed the configuration. I haven't changed anything. If I press F5 now, I will still be using system data SQL client. So I have, in order to adopt this new package, I have to make some code changes. I cannot do this with configuration alone. That's just how it is. And another interesting thing is now we are getting it's a .NET Framework NuGet package, but we are getting .NET Framework compatible packages, and a lot of them, because we are not part of this package, is not built into .NET Framework. A lot of these dependencies or something similar are probably in .NET Framework, but then they're just redirecting to the actual implementation in the .NET Framework. Some of them are related to Azure authentication and so on. All these other features that you get with this package. So in order to start using the package, we use code-based configuration, and just like double lines there. So I add this DB configuration type, I attribute to my DB context class, and if I have multiple DB context classes in my app, I have to add this DB configuration type attribute to all of my DB contexts.
Question on that, Erik. Is there a way to apply that globally to all DB context classes?
Yes, there is a way to say I want to use this configuration. So you could do it at app startup. Let me just find the piece of code. Yes, you can use this piece of code. So you can use this static method called DB configuration set configuration before you new up any DB contexts.
You have to do that really early
Very
on
early.
in your application. It's not a great aspect of the code-based configuration in EF6, but it does work if you do it early.
Yeah. So in a web app, you have to do it in like ASICS, can't remember, the like startup thingy that before anything loads, you have to make the call here. And if you're in an app, you have to do it like the first line in your program CS before you're newing up anything.
But to be honest, a lot of people don't have multiple DB context types.
Correct.
The attribute
I mean, the normal scenario is that you
would
have just a single DB context in your data access layer. Yeah. So this, now we're actually using the new package. You have to take my word for it, because if I press F5, it will work. But let's see whether maybe we actually need to change something else, because we're using this blogging context. Let's see what happens. It's actually just worked, surprisingly enough. So the code-based configuration overrides everything, even app config. I mean, we're telling it to use system data SQL client up here, but it completely ignores that because we're using code-based configuration. That is overriding that whatever is in an app config, which is lucky for making this scenario work. So now we have adopted Microsoft SQL, Microsoft Entity Framework SQL Server. So now we can say we want to actually use one of the new authentication methods against.
Before we go there, Erik, can you open up that Microsoft SQL DB configuration type? Because I want to say something about that too.
Yeah, probably can.
So this ships with the package, right? And it's we've always resisted shipping configuration types historically. I mean, very, very historically, because you often need to do your own configuration as well. So if you're already using a DB configuration type of your own, then you can just basically copy this into it, or you can probably just derive from this or whatever. But basically, you may already have a DB configuration type. But if you do, don't worry. This is just a sugar for setting up the default one if you don't have anything. But you can copy stuff from it, or you can derive from it, and all that should work.
Yeah, and it does. I've had some issues with people that couldn't get it to work, and it turned out they had their own DB configuration. So they could inherit for this, or they could copy paste those 2 lines. And it's also all documented in the README that if you have implemented your own code-based configuration, this is how you should deal with that. But this is the like for 90 something, probably in the good old 99% of cases, this is the happy path that will work for many users.
Yeah. In your example, you're using the default DB configuration as well.
Exactly. I haven't splashed out into using my own custom DB configuration, which is certainly an option with EF6. So let's just now, I'm actually just going to say, we actually, now we are switching back because we're not using code-based configuration anymore. The only code I changed after adopting this provider was actually adding this DB configuration. And then I'm going to change the connection string to point to an Azure SQL database. Can you all see this? Is it clear what's on the screen here? So the important part here is I want to use Active Directory default authentication, which is kind of like a shortcut authentication method, as I understand it. Correct me if I'm wrong, Scott. That's
correct.
Kind of looks for various ways of finding your token on your machine, and then if it finds one that fits your requirements, then it's happy and will proceed with that.
Yep. And to take that a step further, what this is doing under the hood when this key value pair is detected is the default Azure credential type in the Azure Identity Library is being used. That is a sequence or a chain of credential types that are attempted in a very specific order. Attempt to find known environment variables first. And if that fails, move on to workload identity or managed identity, and it goes on and on.
Yeah. So it's kind of a non-specific way of grabbing an identity. So I'm going to change the configuration here to point to this, use this new connection string. Let's just comment out the other one. So I'm now working in a file called app-config, which was something you used in .NET Framework for configuring your application. It's an XML-based file, and so you can do nice things like comment stuff out and things like that. Yeah.
Are you making a jab at Jason there?
Yeah, I was going to ask why was the jab?
So I have, okay, let's just go like this. Actually, I wonder why I even didn't need to. So now let's say we are in a situation that we want to use this Azure SQL database, and we want to use, we don't want to store credentials anywhere, but we are still on system data SQL client. What will actually happen? What kind of error can we expect to get here? So, boom, invalid value for key authentication. So this system data SQL client doesn't know what as Active Directory default means, and it just throws up and says, I give up.
So basically, system data SQL client can't even pass that connection string, let alone go any further.
No, can't do anything useful with it. So now I'm switching. Now I'm switching to using the new provider, which we have referred to in our packages config, and this class is implemented. This DB configuration class is implemented in the new provider. If I don't have the new provider, I cannot resolve this class. And have changed my connection string to a Azure SQL database, and I'm using Active Directory default. I could also use Active Directory MFA, and then I would get a prompt for my MFA credentials, multi-factor authentication credentials. That would also work, but this is probably more interesting because with a little log, I won't get prompted. So let's try to run the app now.
Do you need to change the app
Boom.
config as well?
I need to change the app config as well. Yes.
Okay.
Because
you were
for
referencing
some reason, it's still kind of defaulting to system data SQL client down here.
I think it's
this is, of course, all well documented as well.
Yeah.
So I need to do this, unfortunately, but it is what it is. It's I have to make some code changes. I have to make some configuration changes. That's how it goes. Let's try to run it one more time.
But they didn't seem too bad so far. Like, was like a couple of lines of code.
Yeah.
Exactly. 2 lines of code so far.
For most people, it's pretty straightforward, and there's just the documentation from the years of people running the corner cases that add to the rest of that walkthrough.
So I'm running on the cheapest possible and most resource constrained Azure SQL database, and I'm running it from my. I'm not in this machine I'm presenting on is not located in the data center. It's actually located here in my little office here in Denmark. But nonetheless, you can see we only had 3 rows now, and let's just, for the sake of people who doubt this, go and check my local database. So I'm now looking at my local database and viewing at the data here. Okay, we only see these old things here. I was hoping I could connect here to my Azure SQL database, but it's simply not high powered enough. But what I could do is I could actually connect to it in the portal. And there's a nice query editor there, preview. So when I ran this query last time, it listed 2 rows in the blocks table, and lo and behold, we are actually in Azure, yes, and we are using the modern authentication methods based on OpenID and Entra ID. Sorry, Entra ID. Yes, well, it is OpenID, but yeah.
Excellent, good stuff.
So
Erik, we have a really good question here. I'm going to pop this one up on the screen. Does this new provider support managed identity authentication? And specifically, they're wondering about user-assigned managed identity.
It supports system-assigned managed identity and user-assigned managed identity. Yes. Actually, I should have pulled up something else. So like SQL client Azure. So I should actually have pulled up this very, very good thing here, which explains everything about using, sorry, I'm scrolling too fast here, all the various authentication methods here, supported by Microsoft Entra ID. And with examples of how you shape your connection string for each of the of the authentication methods. And it certainly supports managed identity, both with user assigned and system assigned. If you're using a user assigned identity, you abuse the use ID field to give it an ID for the, I can't remember whether it's object ID or app ID of the user assigned managed identity. And if you're using system assigned,
probably the client ID for user assigned.
Probably the client ID, yeah. And for system assigned, you simply just don't put any credentials in and just say authentication method managed identity. Yes. So now I'm actually just quickly going to, you can see there's a lot of packages here. It didn't look very nice. It packages config. Too many packages, my eyes are hurting. So let's convert this to package reference. It will include just a single package.
So when you bring in that SQL Server package, the 651 package, that will automatically bring in as a dependency, as Erik showed earlier, the entity framework core. That entity framework, I was going to call it the core package, but that's so annoying. The entity framework main package, which also should be then updated to 651. But there's very little difference between 6.2 and 6.5, so don't worry too much about that.
Hardly any. So now I have used package reference instead, which makes we don't have to look at packages.config. It's in the project file instead. So this is still a .NET framework. Maybe I didn't state that clearly enough. Maybe I did. So if we look at this app, it's a .NET Framework 4.7.2 app. I'm just going to save it and make sure that it still builds. It does. So I have installed something called .NET Upgrade Assistant, which is a Visual Studio extension and a command line tool, probably a .NET tool. So I'm going to run upgrade to a newer .NET version. And I'm going for in-place upgrade because I'm brave and I use source control. And I'm going to upgrade to .NET 8. I don't know why .NET 7 is still an option here.
That's a good point. Talk to the team.
Talk to the team. It seemed. Yeah, no, I won't get into that. No. Talk to the team. Yes, if you are in contact with the team, Maira, I would highly appreciate it. So yeah, we'll definitely go for .NET 8. I'm not brave enough to try .NET 9 yet, and we will upgrade everything, of course. We will not upgrade just some of it. So, it's working. $11 seconds. I don't know what it's doing.
Sometimes like StreamYard and stuff also like hogs your resources.
Yeah, exactly. Finalize project dependencies. Yeah, it was finalizing the project dependencies, of course. Yes. So what happened here? I think nothing happened with the app config file, unsurprisingly. And the project file, if we can now double click the project file, which is really nice, and it has been sanitized into this.
Very nice. It's interesting as data set extensions there. Not sure why that's needed. We should look at that.
Exactly. I think there's some you could comment.
There's homework for everyone.
Yeah. There's some interesting bits and pieces here. Never mind. What we have now is a .NET 8 application, which can connect. I know there's no user interface. We'll leave that story. We have a .NET 8 data access thingy that can run, and it can connect to our Azure SQL database. Hopefully, we'll find out in a few seconds. And this could be sanitized. I did try that, but for the sake of time, I won't do it. But this can actually be sanitized. Right now, it's targeting Windows, but this can actually be sanitized to be a cross-platform .NET 8 console app, so it can run on Linux and other operating systems as well. I also concluded that we can actually remove a lot of these config sessions that relate to entity framework, but for the sake of time, I won't do that. So let's see, it's actually, we noticed that it had a reference, the project had a reference to configuration manager, and that is what actually hopefully enables it to still read this blocking context connection string from our app config, even though it's a .NET 8 app. But we'll find out very soon when I press F5 and stop talking.
Moment of truth.
Oh. And again, I apologize for my low bandwidth or something.
So this is using EF6, old school EF6 still. Remember, we haven't updated to EF Core at all, but we're running on the latest .NET, the latest fully released .NET, and we're connecting to Azure with modern authentication.
Correct, Arthur.
Excellent.
That's awesome. It took us just a few seconds to upgrade that one.
It's like the cheapest scoop you can get, but it works nonetheless. Just be patient. I think that's I think that's all I had to say.
You've used an hour of time.
Yeah,
Eric,
you said you didn't know if you
I
had
used
an hour.
I didn't time any of this, but yeah, that's just how it
That
happened
was
to
great.
be. So
Erik, we have one more question I wanted to get to from our friend David Pine.
I think we
and
can
then
just
we'll,
stop sharing my screen now.
Yeah.
So
Let me
just
focus here.
Hit here. Yeah.
and we'll wrap things up after that. So the question is, does the new SQL Server provider support SQL dependency for notifications?
I
do you
don't
want me
even
to
know.
answer, Eric?
What?
I can answer if you like, Eric.
It does.
It does, yes, but SQL dependency has been recommended not to be used for many, many, many years now. And I don't think there's any difference between what System Data SQL Client and Microsoft Data SQL Client do with it. And I don't know, because it's probably been 10 years since I've looked at it, but I'm imagining that they still recommend not using it.
All the code that was in System Data SQL Client has been ported to Microsoft Data SQL Client. That's when they started with the initial commit. That was a port of all that code.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Thank you so much. So folks, take advantage if you're using still on .NET Framework, need to upgrade. Take advantage of the new package. Scott, you were wrapping us up.
Yeah, I would stress, please do take a close look at this new thing. Just if nothing else, from a security perspective, it allows you to use the goodness there. So with that, why don't we wrap things up for this week? I want to, as always, thank all of our loyal viewers for tuning in. If you wanted to check out other streams like the one you saw today, please go out to dot.net/live in your browser and check out other live streams and pre-recorded videos. If you tune into the show next week, we'll be joined by MVP Sean Wildermuth, and we'll be talking about .NET Aspire production deployments to Azure and Kubernetes. Hope to see everyone then. Thanks. Bye.